In the past 73 years, the average house price in America has increased by over 380% from 1985 to 2023. And this trend of drastically increasing home prices, it doesn't show any signs of slowing down. However, while the cost of homes are increasing dramatically every year, we can't say the same for the average person's bank account balance. As of 2023, more than 62% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, and more than 1 in every 5 Americans have no emergency savings. Every day, it's getting harder for the average American to afford a house, especially when home prices since the 1980s have increased by over 380% compared to the average household income increase of just over 230%. Why is there such a disparity of income compared to house prices in 2024? What changed in the marketplace and economy that could have affected this so dramatically? The truth we uncovered is a web of intentional deception and manipulation. Take a step back in time to 1985, a year that might seem like a different world, especially regarding the housing market and income levels. First, take a look at this graph that compares the average household income to the average housing cost in America. You can see a huge increase of over 380% in home prices here, while the average household income has increased by only 230%. At first glance, you may think the answer is clear as to why so many Americans struggle to afford housing. Incomes are not keeping up with the growing increase in housing prices. However, this graph is completely misleading. Even though it accurately represents the data from the last 70 years, we need to do a little more analysis to find out why it appears to be so skewed. While it may look like the average housing cost is growing exponentially more than the average income, the ratios between the two remain extremely similar throughout the entire graph. If you take the average price of American homes in 2023 and then divide it by the average home price in 1985, you'll find that the increase factor is approximately 5 times. Now, if you do the same for the average household income from 1985 and 2023, then the average income has increased by a factor of 3 times. While these numbers are not the same, they're quite similar. So still, why are homes 2 times more expensive than they should be based on fair projection prices from 1985? Even with the help of the Federal Housing Administration, FHA loans, and other home buyer incentives, why are people still having a hard time purchasing homes, even with a down payment as low as 3%? One common argument is that the amount of money spent on living expenses such as food and gas has increased tremendously. While it might seem straightforward to attribute this issue to the rising cost of living, such an explanation diverts attention from the true underlying factors. Our team's comprehensive data analysis has revealed a more sinister reason behind the high cost of homes. The truth is that inflation, goods, services, and living costs have not influenced the ability to buy a home in a way that's worth noting. Think for a second about everything the average person buys in a month. The American's basic average life expenses in 2022, such as food, transportation, healthcare, etc., was about $48,000. The average household income is currently $94,000 before taxes. Remember that this number could include more than one income per household. This means that 50% of a household's income is used on normal living expenses. This percentage has actually gone down from about 65% in 1985. In 2022, this leaves the rest of the household income for home costs like rent or a mortgage. So, what is the real reason we can't buy a home now? While the answer isn't quite so simple due to everyone's circumstances being unique, there is a significant variable regardless of the buyer's situation: inventory. In almost every market in the U.S., there's an inventory shortage. While many people will argue that this shortage results from various factors, including slower construction rates, zoning laws, and a growing population, the real reason is manipulation and control. On the surface, you'd think that buying and selling homes is part of the free market. While on the surface that is true, there's something else at play in the murky waters that big banks don't want you to see. You see, in a free market, one might anticipate that following the turmoil in 2007 and 2008, housing should have gotten cheaper, characterized by lenient mortgage approvals followed by widespread foreclosures. And while there was a small decrease in home prices, they quickly shot back up. There would be a lot of houses available, and normally when there's more of something in the market, prices should go down. This did not happen, and to understand why, we should take a step back for some perspective. In the early 2000s, there was a huge initiative to jumpstart the economy by encouraging consumer spending. Encouraging home purchases was one of those efforts, and so home buying increased during this time. What followed was a point in time most are familiar with in 2007 to 2008, known as the financial crisis, which many remember as the most severe worldwide economic crisis since the Great Depression. The problem is that a lot of the growth in the early 2000s was incentivized by lending institutions offering more high-risk home loans to buyers who should not have qualified under normal circumstances. After the market crashed, the borrowers of these homes could not pay their mortgage and their home was repossessed in foreclosure. Some people blame the crisis on the government, pressuring companies to lessen qualifying factors to increase home spending and money borrowing. Several large banks, including Bank of America, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, and Citigroup, were implicated in the crisis. Banks were just giving loans out left and right. This is partly why the housing market boomed before the crash. And combined with reasonable interest rates, it's no wonder things were on their way toward a big crash. We saw the result of this practice in 2010 with the foreclosure crisis in the United States. Most now refer to this time as Foreclosuregate, and it was marked by a widespread epidemic of improper lending practices initiated by large banks and other lenders. Once the crash forced homeowners out of their homes with evictions, foreclosures started to spread. Foreclosures were previously at 0.46% back in 2005, and then they did this. The number skyrocketed to a rate of 2.23% in 2010. After foreclosing on homes, banks and other financial institutions often ended up with a significant number of bank-owned properties, also known as real estate-owned REO properties. The influx of these REO properties had a substantial impact on the real estate market. Banks were generally interested in selling these properties quickly to recover their losses, which contributed to a decline in home prices here from 2009 to 2011. However, some large banks saw this as an opportunity. It was time to play a longer-term strategy game and potentially lighten their losses. If banks had put all of these foreclosed houses on the market, house prices would have dropped drastically because there would be more supply than demand. Banks knew this and decided to hold on to these properties and slowly release them onto the market at a controlled rate. As long as they had enough money to hold out for a few years, the result would be that house prices would begin to increase. As a result, you can see that in 2012, prices didn't decrease, they actually started to increase exponentially. Controlling housing inventory resulted in the banks having the ability to manipulate the market. Think about it this way. If these REO companies released all of the foreclosure properties into the market during the foreclosures, that would have resulted in a huge excess of houses available to the buying market. With a huge influx of houses on the market, with no significant increase in buying demand, this would have caused a drastic correction in housing prices. This is what house prices could have looked like had the major banks sold all the homes. But these REO companies would have lost billions of dollars on these properties, which is why they chose not to sell. Instead, this is what happened to inventory rates after the financial crisis. This graph shows the number of inventory homes on the market, and based on the current data, as the inventory of homes reduced, the prices increased. You can see a direct correlation. It's not because of all these other factors that we read about, like blaming the Federal Reserve for single-handedly killing the housing market with interest rate hikes. While these factors are able to impact the housing market, these discussions are simply misdirection from the real issue. Big companies like Fox Business write these articles. Take one of the biggest companies involved with the foreclosures, for example. Bank of America served more than 96,000 loans that were foreclosed on. They were fined nearly $17 billion to settle mortgage abuse allegations. This settlement was part of the broader response to the mortgage practices that contributed to the financial crisis in the late 2000s. The fine was aimed at addressing issues related to inappropriate mortgage servicing and foreclosure practices. SunTrust Banks was one of many banks that conducted improper business during the financial crisis. As of 2013, PNC Financial Group, HSBC Holdings, Citigroup, Bank of New York Mellon, Deutsche Bank, U.S. Bancorp, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, and most of all Bank of America were also in on the deceptiveness. Just from the top 10 companies that had an unusually high foreclosure rate, the total came to more than 400,000 loans in foreclosure. Sure, these companies and others are forced to pay huge fines, but does fining a company really make a difference? Bank of America was fined the most out of all 10 companies at $16,650 million for the 96,000 loans they foreclosed on. Their total assets are more than $267 billion. We hear these big numbers, but when put into perspective, this is negligible and doesn't cause them to change their practices. They just factored this 6% fine into their cost of doing business. To put it in perspective, if an average American with an annual salary of about $59,000 faced a similar situation as Bank of America, they would have to pay a fine of $3,540. That would hurt, but you pay more than 2 times that in taxes each year in California. But didn't these companies cause this problem, and should they profit from this crisis? Instead of releasing these houses into the market, they held on to these properties, waiting for the market to stabilize again. These institutions slowly trickled homes into the market, avoiding the decline in home prices. This was a clever strategy to control the inventory of homes for sale, and this definitely paid off for them. If you control the inventory of homes on the market, you can control their prices to a large degree. So, you can see why these banks still continue to only let a few homes at a time be released back onto the market, avoiding a correction in housing prices. This is the biggest reason why home prices are still growing at a higher rate than what they should be after almost 11 years. Do you think these large companies will take a loss based on these fines? Absolutely not. Now, these companies have to make sure they sell these homes at the highest price possible. Each home between these 10 companies was valued at just over $200,000. With over 400,000 homes that were foreclosed on between these 10, that would mean that these foreclosed homes are worth almost $86 billion. So even with these fines, they'll still make their money back with a $37 billion profit, not including the property interest rate, which averages around 5%. That's an extra $4 billion. If you look at this graph, you can see here, between 2010 and 2011, you would expect to see a huge spike in inventory levels based on the over 6 million homes that were foreclosed on. Well, numbers don't lie. You can see that the inventory of homes on the market actually went down, and it continued to decline. Now, let's overlay the median sale price of a home during this same time frame, and you'll notice something quite unfortunate. As the inventory numbers continue to decrease, housing prices continue to grow out of the reach of home buyers today. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about the inventory of homes, primarily since companies or corporations own 25% of single-family homes in the United States. We did some research into who owns the majority shares in these companies. BlackRock owns a large amount of the shares in most of them. You probably haven't even heard about BlackRock. There's a reason for that. Don't forget to leave a like for our independent journalism. Thanks for watching.